Hey everybody, this is Stephen with the Osiris Project, and today we are introducing our free online video series, Intro to Philosophy. Philosophy is very important because it helps give us a foundation, intellectually speaking, for politics, for religion, for science. It comes into play in a lot of areas in our lives that we don't realize, and it has quite a fascinating origin, if you ask me. Quite a break from the status quo at the time. So if you want to stick with us, I think you'll learn a lot. I think it'll benefit you, and it will benefit society, because you will benefit society. So watch it, learn, and give us critical feedback in the comments, please. Again, we are the Osiris Project. You can visit us at theosirisproject.com. Every click and visit to the website does help with our endeavors, so we would appreciate a visit over there. But in short, we are an open source information agency which seeks to foster and promote global security, civil society, and individual sovereignty, not just in this country, but around the world. And we believe that a foundational knowledge of philosophy will help societies around the world. It certainly has in the past. Philosophia, the love of wisdom or friendship with wisdom, that's the meaning behind philosophy. So in order to understand philosophy, in order to become better philosophers ourselves, even in this modern time, we need to go back in time and see how the ancients viewed philosophy, especially the wisdom part of it, Sophia. So wisdom in the ancient world had a lot of things going on behind it. It was global and multidisciplinary. You had emissaries and sometimes monarchs themselves going to other kingdoms to inquire and build up what they knew. Wisdom sought to improve upon life by making it less complicated, making it more communicable, and making it more lasting. By the way, communicability has to do with, like Solomon says in Proverbs, he said, don't yell a greeting at somebody too early in the morning. You know, little sage-like sayings that do what? Well, they help us prosper, yes, but they help us just be better human beings, better bros to our neighbors. Lastly, wisdom involved the mind. I want to make that very clear. The intellect, the gray matter, was crucial for wisdom in the ancient world. Even in the Bible, the wisdom literature, most of it had to do with common sense. It had to do with cause and effect. Therefore, the mind was not the enemy of God. You have a couple of passages in Scripture, in the Bible, which emphasize prayer, but when it comes to wisdom, 98% of the time, 99% of the time, it's very, very earthy. It's very knowledgeable, and it's very much about what I can learn, and that learning is based on these things here. It's about improving life, making it less complicated, making it more communicable, and making it more lasting. So circling back to our question, what is philosophy? Well, philosophy is the love of wisdom, but fleshing it out even more, what philosophy is today, how it affects people today, is in these various ways. So philosophy, and these are my definitions here, you can feel free to use your own, but just based on my studies and how I've been affected by philosophy, I would say that it is the attempt to better one's life and society through thought and careful reflection. Also, it could be said that it's a way of viewing the world. Philosophy is the freedom to question things and open oneself to finding more truth. Now, I do want to say this about that point. Don't just ask questions. It's not about who asks the most questions. It's kind of like in an argument. Some people think whoever shouts the loudest wins. Well, some people think whoever's more confusing in the way they ask a question, they won the argument. It's not about any of that. It's not about show. It's not about numbers. It's about finding truth. And we all see truth from different points of view, from different standpoints, and it's important to question things, question those standpoints in order to discover. And so philosophy is very free-flowing. It's very much up in the air. There's a lot of disorientation that happens in philosophy, and that's where the fun comes in my perspective. It's about the question to, like that glass orb you saw on the beach earlier, just to flip things upside down, see if they work. If they don't work, then that's fine. That's a part of philosophy. That's a part of the philosopher's journey. Philosophy values genuine attempts to explain life. And so, again, that's about looking at things from different lenses, not just asking questions, trying to sound smart in the type of question you're asking, but trying to genuinely attempt to explain life. And lastly, the guy who wrote this one book I like, it's open sourced, W. Russ Payne, he says all of rational inquiry except for science is philosophy. So science is more mechanical, it's a little more developed from a technician's point of view. I'm not putting down science. I love science. My dad graduated with a degree in zoology. No one does that. It's something more broad, but my dad taught me a love for science. I love science. He taught me a love for math. But philosophy exists a little bit outside of that realm. It's a little more creative, a little more free-flowing, and you'll see that even more so in just a minute here. So we have human history existing for as long as it has been. Mythology was used during that time, largely to explain many things, but particularly weather and transformations that occur in the universe, in nature. And so what causes change? What is the thing that changes? What is our basic reality? These are questions that the natural philosophers, the first philosophers of all of time, had, and they sought to depart from mythology as a way of explaining nature, and particularly change in nature. Not really something you would think would come up in common conversation. Why do changes in nature happen? But this is a question that the earliest of early philosophers had, and they were called the natural philosophers. So we have myth-making being the way of understanding change in nature up until ancient Greece, up until about the 6th century BC in the Greek colonies. All right. A lot to take in, but you can pause this and go back as you like. So anyway, the first philosophers wanted to use what I call natural models for said understanding. This is before scientific models and all that stuff, but they wanted a way of explaining transformations that they see all around them. And we don't have too much of their writings left today, but from what we understand, we know what they were getting at. Seasons, weather, birth and death, rebirth, meaning new generations of species. So how do changes in nature happen from a natural point of view? Again, this is the birth of philosophy and all this stuff. One big issue that came up in the discussion of changes in nature was substance. What is the substance of reality? What does it have to do with change? Well, to change a thing from A to B, you need to know what that thing is. And so Thales is the first of the natural philosophers, living in the 6th to 5th centuries BC. Why we know him is that he said that the universe is foundationally made of water. And we wish we could go back in time and ask him what he meant by that. He said everything goes back to water one day. Everything comes from it, everything returns to it. And so if you think about it, water, at least in its liquid form, it's the most plentiful version of it that we have. It's the most plentiful state of it. And we can observe without fancy scientific tools that water changes states. It changes from a solid to a liquid. It changes from a liquid to a gas. And so Thales presumably put his thinker to work and concluded that all states in the universe come from liquid water. Every state is simply a state of water. And every change in that is a change from one state to another state of water. So that's Thales, the first of the natural philosophers, and other of those guys in the preceding centuries. They built upon that next 2 centuries. So I hope that's interesting to you. Can you imagine if you're not just 98% but 100% water? And this is a break from Zeus and the gods and the mythological explanation of transformations in nature. So the natural philosophers understood basic concepts of modern science by reason alone. I don't mean to say reason alone in a religious way, like with reason they could do anything, but with their rationality they were able to understand these 2 things, which I think is cool. Diverse and unbreakable particles and invisible and natural forces. And so one of these natural philosophers said that strife was driving things apart from each other, and love was the energy or the force bringing them back together. So that was his explanation of how there is order in the universe. So you got to appreciate these guys, not necessarily for the conclusions they came up with, but for their pursuit of those conclusions. What can you use with your mind? It doesn't mean you'll find the right answer all the time, but think critically and you might find something new. So these guys departed from using characters to explain weather to talking about particles and forces to explain weather and the entire freaking universe, everything in it, everything that exists. So you have gotten your feet wet in philosophy. Now you want to study it a little bit more. What do you do now? Where do you go from here? Well, there are 3 main categories or branches of philosophical study, and these categories are the following. We have A, metaphysics, B, epistemology, and C, ethics, and we'll get into each of them right now. First up, we have metaphysics. What is reality? That's the corresponding question to metaphysics right there. Here are some example questions in the same vein. What is the fundamental nature of reality? The last of the natural philosophers, before Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, the classical philosophers, before they took the stage and really redefined the discipline, Democritus is the last guy to comment on the nature of reality. And his contribution to the world is saying that, hey, look, just by using common sense, I can't break this anymore. I can't break this down infinitely, this object in my hand. Dust, I mean, if everything could break down infinitely or forever, then everything would break down. There would be no stones, and I don't have the exact wording of how he put it, but basically we would all disintegrate as matter. And he came up with the idea of the atom, or I would say superstring, an unbreakable basic constituent of reality. Something that is different, so you can have different varieties of it, like Lego pieces or tinker toys. You can tell I'm a dad. You have these building blocks that are slightly different shaped and things like that, but that's it. You can't go any less than that. And because if everything infinitely breaks down, then everything infinitely breaks down, and we don't have a universe anymore. We don't have matter anymore. And so Democritus came up with the idea of an unbreakable thing. Atom, it means unbreakable, atom. And in the 19th century, when we discovered what we call the atom, we thought that was it, but we discovered things could be broken down a little more. Now we say it's a superstring, a vibrating strand of energy through multiple dimensions in the universe. Maybe we'll find something else after that. But we will find something. We will find that substrata of reality that can't be broken down anymore. Metaphysics, yay, you gotta love that. That was all with philosophy. He really contributed to science in significant ways, I would say. And it was only in the 19th century AD that we were able to look back and say, hey, that guy was onto something. That guy was onto something. So here are some more examples of metaphysical questions. Are some things more real than others? If something seems more real to me, is that just my senses going at it more strongly than at other times, or is an object truly more real or more existent or more there than other objects? So that does go into another branch too, but that is largely a metaphysical question here. What is reality? Are some things more real than others? Can some things be more real than others? Here's another question. Could the quantum realm help explain spiritual experiences? And so can the soupy, almost magical, still unknown aspect of math known as quantum electrodynamics, could that help explain some things that go on in our brain? Is there a God consciousness out there? Does God exist? And that's the next question right there. Does God exist? Are we inside someone else's mind? Is the universe just inside a giant alien's head and we are its neurons? If that's the case, could another universe be inside my head? That's a metaphysical question. How about this one? When does personhood commence for the individual human being? Is it 12 days after conception? Is it simply when there's a heartbeat? If that's the case, then if I need an artificial heart, am I not a person anymore? These are real questions dealing with metaphysics and personhood in the nature of man. Does personhood begin a second before delivery, after delivery? Some people do argue after delivery, so you do need to keep that in mind. Without even getting into the ethical side of things, the metaphysical side, when am I me? And when does my individuality begin? Lastly, is the future just as concrete as the past? Do I have a destiny? Is everything mapped out for me from the beginning? You got to ask some of these questions too sometimes. Epistemology deals with the question, how do we know reality? How do you know that you know what you think you know? Are there some things we cannot know? How do we know what the limits of our knowledge is without knowing what is on the other side of those limits? What is the best way to sift reliable knowledge from unreliable knowledge? I like this one. How do I know that I exist? And then you follow that up with the answer, and then you come back around with how do you know that? How do you know that? How do you know that? How do I know that I exist? Am I dreaming right now? So French philosopher René Descartes, he dealt heavily with those last two statements in his work called Meditations. And he had a dream the night before that seemed like he was awake. And when he woke up, he wasn't sure if he was dreaming still. And so this really got him to think, how do I know I'm not dreaming right now? How do I know that my reality is real? Things like that. But he settled on the statement, I think, therefore I am. Because if I didn't exist, then I couldn't even ask the question. So that's how he solved that crisis. How do I know that I exist? Well, I think. therefore I am. So that's Rene Descartes right there. But that's epistemological in nature. How do I know I exist? How do I know reality? What's the limits of my knowledge or human knowledge in general? And an understanding of that helps us to become humble. We can't know everything as human creatures. We're not gods or demigods, and if we're trying to replace God with some other type of notion, then we can't replace him with ourselves. Last but not least, I hope it's not least because it's a very important field, is ethics. What do we do with reality? So we had what is reality, then we had how do we know reality, now we have what do we do with reality. Questions like what is the right way to live? How do we construct rules for living without being too rigid or too flexible? These deal with ethics. What is the best way to structure society? In some ways of categorizing philosophy, you have political philosophy being its own category. It's a very important aspect of the love of wisdom. Can we approach ethics without religion? Can we approach ethics without experience? These are questions philosophers have asked. Yeah, that's a tough one, and it should be one that we ought to wrestle with. What is religion's play in the ethical landscape, in the ethical discussion? Ethics, by the way, it's the thought aspect of morality. Morality is more of rules and conclusions and the nuts and bolts of behavior. But ethics, it's the more abstract and the discussions regarding these things. We see morality sometimes being compared to math. General relativity, Einstein's theory of general relativity. As you travel faster, your time in relation to other places in the universe slows down. What does that have to do with ethics? Well, some people appeal to that, saying, well, science is relative. They don't really know what they're talking about, but they say, the time is relative. And they appeal to the word relative, and then they say, well, don't bother me. Well, that's not a good way to live in society. And then this is a branch of study that just has branches going out in all directions, all over the place. But Euclidean geometry, back in the 4th to 3rd centuries BC, you have a mathematician named Euclid, and without getting into the weeds too much there, this Greek guy, he came up with geometry that was very simple. It described the planets and orbits and the orbit of the moon, and everything seemed to be along a very simple, organized path in science. And then Einstein came along in the 20th century and added more flavor to the math. Used more colors with it, but he still had rules. A black hole could only do so many things, that sort of thing. It wasn't a sandbox like in Minecraft where you could do anything. And even in Minecraft, you have code and different laws and different rules binding the character to a certain story or a certain set of options in his behavior. There was certain constraints to what you can do as Steve in the game Minecraft and other games like that. So general relativity, complex, Euclidean geometry, simple. Is morality like any of that? Can we appeal to math at all when it comes to what I should do as a human being? What I should do in terms of ethical behavior? So all of this is complicated. Can you simply delete religion from society? We have atheistic regimes in the communist manifestations of statism that are very brutal, very anti-freedom. We would consider them to be abusers of human rights, abusers of freedom of speech rights. Simply avoiding religion isn't going to solve dilemmas regarding ethics. Sorry, that's just what history backs up. But philosophically, is there a way to answer some of these questions about ethics, regarding ethics, without appealing to religion, or without appealing to Jesus, or without appealing to the apostles or to Moses, without appealing to some religious leader living today? Why care about philosophy? British philosopher Bertrand Russell had this to say, and it was quite a bit too. The value of philosophy is, in fact, to be sought largely in its very uncertainty. Philosophy, though unable to tell us with certainty what is the true answer to the doubts which it raises, is able to suggest many possibilities which enlarge our thoughts and free them from the tyranny of custom. Thus, while diminishing our feeling of certainty as to what things are, it greatly increases our knowledge as to what they may be. It removes the somewhat arrogant dogmatism of those who have never traveled into the region of liberating doubt, and it keeps alive our sense of wonder by showing familiar things in an unfamiliar aspect. That's from Problems of Philosophy, The Value of Philosophy. I highlight sense of wonder because that's what Justine Garter in Sophie's World, it's a book on philosophy. It told really well from a fictional point of view, but it's really something. If you want to read anything about philosophy, I recommend Sophie's World. But in that book, the author does say, all you need is a sense of wonder. That's all you need to become a philosopher. That's what children have. You don't need all these books. You don't need a fancy education. Those can contribute, but all you need is wonder and a sense of wonder, and that's what some people have lost altogether, just by being adults living in an adult world. So what do you think? Is philosophy for you? Is the love of wisdom, being wisdom friendly, something that's up your alley? I hope it is. It is for me, and it is for a lot of people. Most people, everyone actually, they've been philosophers since they were kids, and then through life they learned how to just find answers to things, and they stopped peering into things. They stopped asking about things. Philosophy is an open door. It really leads you to other possibilities, and it can be fun. You can put things on a whiteboard. You can tease different thoughts in your mind. Einstein used to run thought experiments in his head. They weren't hardcore, ironclad beliefs, but they were just ideas that he toyed around with from time to time. So anyway, that's all that we have for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like, share, and subscribe. And let us know in the comments what you think. Give us your feedback. What's your favorite branch of philosophy? And how could this benefit you? All right. Take care.